Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Propcast. My name is Louisa Dickens, host of the Propcast and co-founder of LMRE, the global PropTech recruitment and search consultancy. In this podcast, we will explore how the digital evolution of the real estate industry is impacting the property market. The aim of each episode is to introduce you to a PropTech innovator and discuss how their work has created a shift in focus when it comes to digitizing the built environment. Shameless plug, but I'm honored to be a judge at this year's 8th Annual Real Estate Tech Awards, hosted by PropTech. The applications are closing soon, so head to their website to apply, and I look forward to awarding a prize to one of you in October. If you're interested in finding out more about PropTech or applying for a job in this space, or keen to know who the big players are that are moving and shaking the real estate industry up, we have you covered, and we'll be bringing you an episode each week to connect you to the VCs, PropTech startups, and real estate professionals from around the globe. Also, a big shout out to our sponsors of the podcast, ReamTech and CreTech, who you will hear from during the episode. We are back for season 6. Can you believe it? I started the podcast last year during the pandemic to connect our community virtually, seeing as we couldn't meet up physically. And what a year it's been. I'm very grateful for all of those who have joined me over the past 5 seasons and looking forward to meeting many more PropTech innovators. Anyway, on to the show to meet the first guest of season 6. Today we'll be discovering what the next phase of PropTech holds for the real estate industry. PropTech really got into the mainstream between 2016 and 2020. The COVID pandemic has served as an important milestone in PropTech's maturity. We look back at the lessons of the last 5 years and discuss where PropTech is going and what hard questions it still has to answer to help the real estate industry meet its potential. And today you'll hear from my dear friends, Alex Edds, Head of Innovation at JLL, and Jack Sibley, ex-Nuvian Head of Innovation, but who is now the Director of Business Development at Insurami. Jack and Alex will review the last 5 years and lessons learned, the education gap between VCs and solutions, what various buzzwords really mean. We'll also be addressing the hard questions focused around diversity and organization strategy, and then we'll finish off chatting through the next 5 years in the future. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
For our audience listening, Jack leads business development and partnerships at Insurami, which is a fast-growing startup at the intersection of PropTech and FinTech. Insurami's deposit guarantee platform gives landlords the same protection as the traditional cash deposit, while saving tenants over 95% of the upfront deposit costs. Jack previously led innovation at Nuvian Real Estate, one of the world's largest real estate investment managers, including venture capital, PropTech strategy, and portfolio implementation. Alex, who is also joining us, is Director of Innovation and Digital Consulting for JLL. Alex advises JLL's clients on the technological and systematic disruption facing the property industry. Alex is also a fellow board member of the United Kingdom PropTech Association. Alex's career history includes serving as Head of Sustainability at JLL UK, and at Nuvian, a Director of Upstream Sustainability Services and a strategic advisor to a number of UK PropTech companies. So those who are listening in, if you want to reach out to Alex about maybe some solutions, please do. You can find him on LinkedIn. Alex takes pride in challenging the status quo and believes there's a huge opportunity to improve the built environment by fundamentally changing the way we design, build, and manage physical spaces to better serve the people that use them and the environment upon which they depend. So thank you again for both joining me. And let's start with, maybe you can both elaborate a little bit more about your roles, and why don't we start with Alex? How do you get into it? Well, obviously from my side, I'm seeing a massive increase of investment into these roles globally from the real estate consultancies who are finally getting budgets for it. But you've done this role, at Nuvian, now at JLL. Talk me through it. What does your job actually mean?
Right. Yes. Big question to start with. It's been a journey. So I think, sort of working backwards from today, and so as per your introduction, thank you. My role is now actually more client facing than anything else. And so I'm, helping to advise our clients on what, and how to effectively sort of navigate through some of the challenges that not only PropTech, but sort of generally some of the challenges that they're facing and that real estate is facing, and how they can fundamentally future-proof their buildings for that. And obviously digital technology is a key part of that. I got to this point from being most recently the sort of innovation director at JLL, and that was more of a sort of inward-facing role, looking at how we as a business can innovate ourselves, obviously leveraging technology to do that. And I got there, and I suppose that was the sort of slight pivot in my career from very much a sort of sustainability focused professional role for sort of 10, 12 years before that. And as you mentioned, I was head of sustainability at JLL UK. I was also a head of sustainability where Jack used to work at Nuvian, although it wasn't called Nuvian at the time. And then prior to that, back at JLL, and sort of came to JLL through an acquisition of a team that I was a part of. So sort of, if you like, I've already kind of had two careers, if you like, in terms of one being focused very much on kind of the outcome of sustainability. And that was, I suppose, and to explain and I guess also explain why I pivoted or why I wanted to pivot was sort of in the early 2000s and then the early 2010s. And it was when sustainability, probably similar to how we're seeing PropTech and digital and innovation now, very much a growing trend. It was becoming a boardroom agenda, but it was still seen as a little bit of a dirty word. You were sort of the greenie in the corner that was going to cost me money. And I think, I sort of got to the point where I was feeling like the progress is moving, but it's not moving fast enough. And I was starting to see, this is around sort of 2013, 14, 15, a lot of new solutions coming onto the market, a lot of them technology driven. But again, they weren't getting traction with us or with our clients fast enough. So, to boil it down, it came down while I was head of sustainability at JLL, putting the proposition together to say, well, look, could we create some form of accelerator where we could help sort of fast track some of these solutions, again, all being focused on sustainability at the time. And that kind of led to, long story short, saying, do you know what, we need a role to kind of help us navigate this space. And actually, this is a lot broader than sustainability, obviously. And so therein lay the sort of foundations for a new role, which I sort of self-titled myself as Director of Innovation at the time. And really, it's been a journey since then, as I say, from more of a sort of inward-looking role and now very much being a client-facing role.
So how many years you reckon it took JLL to give you sort of that, I guess, a full-time sort of role doing innovation?
I suppose, on and off, obviously, because I did a year at Nuvian, it's been scarily, I think it's been 13 years at JLL. But it was a year in the role at head of sustainability. And again, I think it's really important, and probably coming on to some things we're going to talk about later. The relationship I had with the senior management of the UK business, some of whom are still here. The trust that you sort of build with those individuals, I think, is critical, and I'm always thankful for them to give me the flexibility and work with me to help support my career. And almost, together we kind of figured out, well, actually, this is something that's going to benefit the business. It's also going to benefit your intellectual, curiosity. And yes, we will create a new role with you. So, I'll always be thankful for them in doing that. But I think a lot of it came down to right place at the right time, articulating what I saw going on in the market back to effectively a set of decision makers and saying, I think we need to do something. Yeah. And obviously, being grateful that they then took that on and gave me the role to do it.
Yeah, but 13 years is some time. And I think it's PropTech is almost, finally being taken seriously and almost seen like as an asset class in its own right. And perceptions are changing, which we're going to elaborate on a little bit in a few questions later. Jack, you've obviously, you both worked at Nuvian. Were you maybe the first innovation hire in the UK, and now you've also gone and joined an actual PropTech startup? So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about your role.
Yeah, sure.
Why the move?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, so I think going way back, I think, Alex, we never quite crossed over at Nuvian. I think you were a year before I joined or so on, or a couple of years. But yeah, I mean, actually, to your point, I wasn't an innovation hire either. And I think this kind of first generation of people who have worked in an innovation, inverted commas, role on real estate, I've got a very similar story to Alex, which was more, you have to kind of find the person and then fit the role around them. And then that role happens to be innovation, rather than the company, goes out specifically to recruit and look for an innovation role and then finds the person, if that makes sense. So my story is very similar to Alex. I joined Nuvian at uni and worked in the research team, then worked in the product team. And I think, similar to lots of companies, have this kind of became the informal point person for innovation and startups and tech. because I was, young and keen and just interested in mucking in, even if it was slightly outside of my job description and my day to day, and taking these things on. And I think lots of groups, even groups who today don't have heads of innovation, we'll come on to talk about it, do often have like, one or two or three, even sometimes like champions, informal champions of innovation. And that was kind of my role for, I probably did that kind of for 18 months. And then as part of a strategy where I got the, kind of a few stakeholders to ask me to do a little bit of a more strategic review of how we approach innovation more generally across the business. Kind of did that, and similar to Alex, had a good relationship with the senior management there. And out of that kind of review, we decided to create a role for me to move into that was this kind of innovation, kind of dedicated innovation role. And so then did that for 3 or 4 years. And that was everything from, it was really, similar to probably Alex, write your own job description and job title to an extent. But for me, it was very broad, everything from like VC kind of indirect investments, where we made a commitment to one of Fifth Wall's US funds, for example, through to like more internal data strategy side of things. And then within our portfolio as well, how do we adopt smart building technologies, for example, or new alternative data sources to help us make better investment decisions, and kind of that kind of full spectrum of how can PropTech and technology help us from site acquisition through asset management to disposals, as well as on the capital raising and fund and operational side. And so did that for 3 or 4 years and probably met 250 startups a year.
Wow.
And of that, we probably did trials about 30 every year, and then we moved from like trials or pilots into kind of scaling them across the platform across the US and Europe. And to your point, I think just got to a really interesting point post COVID where I could see this opportunity, and COVID was kind of milestone, as you mentioned, for real estate, and the opportunities coming out of COVID for PropTech and for specific types of companies were going to be huge. And having worked on the corporate innovation side, wanted to try my hand at being on the other side of the table, almost, basically pitching to 250 large corporates a year, rather than being on the corporate side, speaking to 250 startups, and joined Insurami. And Insurami, just to add very briefly onto your intro, decided to choose Insurami to join because it's a really interesting group at the kind of intersection of PropTech and FinTech, and you don't actually get that many groups that certainly that maybe you get some blockchain based ones, but that many really kind of practically minded groups that really combine PropTech and FinTech. We address a really clear pain point in the leasing process, which is that tenants hate locking up their cash and deposits, but landlords need deposits more than ever. And so our guarantee product kind of bridges the gap between that, giving landlords the same protection and saving the tenants, as you mentioned, 95% of their upfront costs. So that's the point we're at now, and especially in the middle of COVID. I think probably everyone thought we'd be slightly further out of it than we are now, although I know we just recently had kind of Freedom Day. So we are officially, in theory, we're officially unlocked. But certainly it's been really interesting kind of to move in that time as well, when you're seeing the whole industry kind of reevaluate their own roles, their own businesses, and also the business model of real estate as well, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk to. So long introduction, but thanks for having me here.
No, that's perfect. Well, you guys obviously demonstrated you've both been in the space for a lot longer than other people. Did you know that the average cost of making a bad hire in the real estate market is £60,000? Or if you're listening to us from the US, that's $83,000. Finding out an employee is moving on is never great news, but sadly, it's unavoidable. The cost of hiring so high, it's important to get it right the first time round. So if you're struggling to find the right candidates, why not consider working with a recruitment agency? We're experts at finding the right people to fill roles. And because we already have a database to hand, we can speed up the process too. So head to lmre.tech to brief us on your next hire. In the last 5 years, what are the major sort of changes you've seen and maybe lessons you have both learned? So Alex, why don't you start off with elaborating on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's interesting. And even just hearing Jack, I think so many things resonate in terms of, when we started out on this journey, how naive we were that we could go really fast and do all these wonderful things, and and to some extent, things are still going quite slowly. Albeit, I think when you stand back and actually look at the magnitude of change in terms of, it's funny, I was even talking to someone over the weekend about this in terms of just diversity of makeup of people working within JLL, for example. I mean, when I started at JLL, it was all mainly men in suits, and that's the way it was. And now, even just by the way, the people that work there, the way they dress, and what they do, you can tell that it's become a much more creative industry. And I think that's really pleasing to see. And so I think on that journey, and when you step back, it's sort of easy to reflect on it. But I think similar to sustainability, on that 10 or 12-year journey I did with sustainability, when you're in the deep end and you're really trying to get stuff done, and you're working day to day to try and do it, it can feel quite slow. And I feel that there's quite a lot that I can relate to from an innovation role in that respect. But actually, when I stand back and look over the 12, 15 years working in sustainability, the progress that was made by the whole industry has been really significant. And actually, and it's quite interesting because obviously I stepped out of sustainability being my main focus. I've been doing this role, and now, literally in the last sort of 12 months or so, and perhaps partly accelerated by COVID, but I think also just generally kind of political will and I think just social will has meant that sustainability has become so important across the value chain that now tech innovation is really coming alongside that to drive much quicker results. And so it's been quite interesting sort of looking back and going, well, actually, things have moved. Yes, from an individual kind of day-to-day perspective, sometimes it can feel frustrating, but I think you have to kind of sometimes just sit back and go, do you know what? A, this is a slow-moving industry, but B, nothing happens overnight. And if you put in the hard yards, what we're now seeing with sustainability and the kind of the acceptance of it, it's on the board level everywhere. There are roles everywhere. I keep getting, I get pinged every day with new roles around sustainability. I think if we're putting in the foundations of tech and innovation now, what will be in the next sort of 5-10 years. So I think the acceleration in uptake and even just to the point on roles, I think it's quite poignant that I certainly represent that sort of first wave of innovation, if you like, leaders. I'm certainly guilty of jack of all trades, as it were, master of none, because you have to be, given that the immaturity of the industry and understanding what needs to happen, it's kind of all focused on, and so therefore limited resources put into it. They require people that can kind of have a wide spectrum of understand the business drivers. Literally, I'll be speaking to a CEO about Flex and the change of their pivoting their entire business model. The next day, I'm talking to an FM provider about an IoT device to put into a workplace, and it's everything in between. And so to have that flexibility is incredibly important. I know we'll come on to it, but I think if you then think about where that will go, clearly specialisms will come in and it will become much clearer, a bit like sustainability, where you have now much clearer skill sets to drive much clearer outcomes. I think we're still in that kind of middle bit, and certainly some organizations perhaps are leading, and others are now just starting to come into the journey.
I guess to build on that, what I'm sort of saying is a lot of these bigger organizations are looking for more generalists. So like you and Jack, you guys get the wider sort of built environment. They don't quite have those more specialists like sustainability or innovation roles just yet. And they all say, we want to bring people from outside of the industry. And Alex, we can go into a question which is directed right at that, but how they hire these people, but then they can't look after them or give them like a full-time role doing it, or know how to sort of manage them or culturally sort of look after them and sort of really get the most out of their skills and knowledge. Jack, what about you in terms of the last 5 years? What are the sort of major lessons you've learned and the major things you've seen?
I think you're probably going to hear this a lot because Alex probably had similar experiences doing so, but I completely agree with what Alex is saying. And the best metaphor I've got for the point of you're in the detail every day, it doesn't feel like anything's moving forward, is it's like when you zoom in on a graph and you see like the volatility, but then when you zoom out, hopefully that upward trend is even if it's not exponential, which you hope it is, it's at least on a linear basis going in the right direction. You realize how far you've come. Completely Completely agree with that. And when I started out looking at the innovation side, the questions from real estate were extremely basic, kind of, I call it like, not in a critical way, but like primary school level, questions of like, what is a startup? What is venture capital? What's this whole exciting, fuzzy, shiny thing that, that's on the side of the industry that's causing a bit of noise, that's causing a bit of a ruckus, as it were, and that people are starting to pay a bit more attention to. I think in the last 5 years, the other, I think, theme of this discussion is going to be that parallel between sustainability and technology, which I think is huge and is really great to see, both in terms of specialisms of roles, in terms of how important it is as an issue, that how much attention the industry pays to it, and that difference between being the greenie in the corner or the innovation guy versus being baked into the BAU and the status quo of every business. So I think completely agree with that. I'd also say, when I say PropTech, I also mean like the real estate side of the industry, like how real estate is working with innovation. I don't just mean PropTech startups, but it's kind of in the teenage phase is how I'd call it, the last 5 years. And now hopefully we're coming to talk about the next 5 years are going to be kind of maturing into, a young adult. But by teenage phase, I mean, a huge amount of potential, but like very clear immaturity in some areas. Some of that was on, the more PropTech startup side, on the VC side. Some of that was on, real estate firms and how immature they are, trying to engage with innovation as a concept or with specific companies to work with. So I think there's a lot of very clear problems and pain points in real estate, but a lot of them were built on, trying to solve them. You had to still work on foundations of an industry that was a very 20th century industry, that was, the ROI mechanisms for a lot of the implementation of these solutions just wasn't there because of how real estate works with long leases and with the existing business models that real estate has done. And now I think, we're coming to about the next 5 years. I think it's going to be much more less about, historically, I think the last 5 years, you did really well as a PropTech group if you had a very clear, simple product that could be very easily adopted by a real estate group and that solved, a pain point that was kind of like a marginal gains pain point. It was like, we help you manage your, this specific part of your data slightly better, or we help you, achieve something within your building slightly better, like access control, for example. I think going forward, a lot of the disruption historically has been from outside the industry, groups like WeWorks and co-working, who actually think about new business models. And hopefully coming the next 5 years, we're going to see kind of more of that business model innovation, which is what really needs to change, come from within the industry as well as outside.
Position yourself to thrive with a 5-week course that covers the essentials of designing, developing, marketing and operating offices in 2021 and beyond. Check out the Future-Proof Office course at realinnovationacademy.com. Quote LMRE for a 10% discount.
Why don't we start off with, you mentioned about sort of buzzwords. Do you think there's a misunderstanding of like the real estate industry of what PropTech means, what innovation means, what digitalization means? Like, do these surveyors or old school real estate brokers know what they need to do, what they need to read about, how they need to upskill? I guess from two of you who've worked in those businesses, what on that front needs to be done? And maybe Alex, you can go first with this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's another big one, isn't it? There's so much. I mean, I think trying to break it down, I suppose, as well in terms of what do you need to know? Because at the end of the day, you only need to know what you need to know based on the role that you're doing, or what the client or the future of your particular area of business is going. So I think certainly no one individual is going to have to know everything. And yes, of course, there's a lack of, I think, still a lack of knowledge and understanding, even at a fairly simple level by the majority. That is changing quickly. I think the way that it's changing is interesting, because what I see most organizations doing is, well, let's just recruit in people and they will be the person that's going to make this change happen. Now that's when any of us worked in an organization, if you just suddenly have a new person or new team arrive and suddenly they're doing a whole new and quite frankly, they're doing the interesting stuff, that's quite difficult for an existing the existing business to kind of get on board with. And so and not to talk about failure, but I think innovation is part of that failure is part of innovation. But I think some attempts to bring in a new team or an individual, give them the resources to go and innovate, and then lo and behold, a year, 2 years, 3 years later, it's not really working. Well, no surprise really, because they've just kind of been sent over there to do something, and the rest of the business is carrying on. So I think fundamental cultural transformation is so important to this, and that's hard. There is no one solution, there is no easy solution, and it takes time. But I think the one thing that I think is still lacking is a clear plan and strategy of how to do that. And I think that's something that real estate hasn't really gotten to grips with yet. And I think when you see perhaps other sectors, and finance being a good example of a fairly close cousin, how the banks now set themselves up in terms of, okay, how do we invest in tech? How do we bring that tech into the business? How do we build our own tech? And then how do we train and make people use that tech to drive their business? I mean, it's a fairly clear digital strategy supported by organizational strategy.
Well, Jack, you've been the guy, piloting these startups, getting them into businesses. You're now the guy trying to get your product into these, some of these archaic businesses. What have you sort of seen? What do you think needs to be done here as well? Like upskilling more? What do we do?
I don't think it's necessarily skills. I think it's more about culture, mindset, and about the relationships and incentives within the industry. I think there's definitely an economics quote about economics study of incentives, and a lot of people, a lot of the relationships between different industry stakeholders is what is often holding things back. You can go in and talk to anyone. A lot of the value of this technology is, some of it's going to be on the operational side, and that's going to be very important, but a lot of it's also going to be more about how can they serve their clients better. And if the people you're selling to don't necessarily, whoever that is, whether that's FMs thinking about their operate their landlord partners, whether it's landlords thinking about how do we attract tenants, or fund managers thinking how do we attract new capital, if they don't know, if they're not open to making this a new part of their pitch, and kind of selling themselves better based on their adoption of technology, in the same way they sell themselves based on the adoption of sustainability and everything else. I think it's hard. So a lot of it is pretty basic. Well, when I say basic, it's really hard. There's no one size fits all solution, but it comes down to incentives, culture, just organizational strategy. So it's who reports into who. I'd also say the other big thing for me is, and I think for everyone, is obviously diversity. And real estate, you mentioned before, it's getting better, but isn't the most diverse. Technology is also not the most diverse. It's no surprise that real estate technology, or the intersection of the two, isn't the most diverse either. And I think that's both in terms of race and gender, but also thought processes, and people's actual industry background and knowledge. And that has to change. For me, the next 5 years is big about that as well. How do we bring in more people at the top of the funnel who have a much broader diversity of thought, as well as helping them stay within the industry and find the right roles within the industry, and as well as bringing people who have started their careers in other industries into real estate. And I think that we're still at the very start of that conversation, to be honest.
One thing just to add, I think, which is quite interesting, is obviously real estate, big sector. It's an incredibly entrepreneurial sector, and it attracts really entrepreneurial people, and therefore there is a type of person and a type of willingness that those individuals are incentivized by. However, I wouldn't say that it's innovative, and just to be clear on the difference, and entrepreneur in so much that you see a lot of people saying, well, I've done this at JLL, or I've done this at an organization, and this is how real estate works. I'm just going to go and do it on my own. And you see pop up, new real estate companies all the time. 3 or 4 people will leave an organization, they'll set up on their own, but they'll pretty much do cookie cutter exactly what they did before, because, and I'm not teaching how to suck eggs, but the real estate industry hasn't been disrupted. It's quite easy just to replicate and go, well, I can make money doing the same thing myself. There's a very entrepreneurial industry. People love the challenge. The incentives, the financial incentives are there for them to do that. But it's a very kind of cookie cutter approach. And I think that the innovation, which has been historically pretty poor, is, okay, how do we bring, to Jack's point, new ideas, new business models, new ways of solving that problem, or new ways of bringing a product to market? And that has been lacking. And I think what we're now seeing is organizations trying to figure out, well, what's my role in that, if any? That's the first thing. And secondly, how do I do that? And I think, we can come on to talk about this maybe, but I think certainly there are some operating models emerging, whether it's I'm just going to invest and I'm going to carry on, I'm going to bring in a whole team and I'm going to try and build stuff, I'm going to try and bring a whole new load of people in and sort of embed them throughout the organization. I'm going to bring in a champion from Silicon Valley and they're going to lead it. So there's lots of different approaches being taken to figure out, well, A, what's my role, but then B, how do I implement that? And I think, to Jack's point, that's where we are. But I think to culturally embed that, you then have to empower and motivate those individuals, like I mentioned, who are sort of incentivized by the opportunity to say, well, look, guys, you and girls, you can take that opportunity, you can go and be entrepreneurial, but here are the tools to help you do that.
Yeah.
And just one sentence on the back of that is, I think the other challenges with real estate, there's so many stakeholders involved in every single decision or the implementation of that decision as well. And so sometimes you might get a really innovative person on one side, but the whole rest of the supply chain isn't able to implement the vision. Yeah, it comes back to incentives and mindset again, but it's
sorry to interrupt, but there's so many opportunities and it's so easy to say no, we're not going to do that, rather than it is to put in incentives and to say yes. The whole system is designed to be, no, we're not going to cost engineer that out. It's too difficult. We don't know because the next person on the supply chain doesn't understand it. So take it out. That is rife.
Well, it's clear here there's a huge amount of opportunity, but within how many of these big businesses who are going to be using the products, how many of them are sort of properly engaged? Is there, do you think there are enough solutions out there which are at the point of development where you would actually take the risk and trial them? Jack, you've trialed various pilots. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any one business has got everything right. Most real estate businesses are at a point now where the appetite for like piloting something new, I think is definitely there. Certainly from the clients I speak to, we get a lot of positive engagement, and we're doing something that's fairly technical in some ways, like replacing the traditional cash deposit. We get a lot of interest, and we kick on with a lot of pilots and get people comfortable with it. Yeah, we kick on with a lot of pilots. I think the challenge for real estate is how do you really take that to the next level? Go beyond. We're doing, and I think it's the same with sustainability, and where sustainability was like 3 or 4 years ago. It used to be on sustainability, let's have 1 or 2 buildings that are like our really green buildings, and we put in stuff into it, and they can be our like flagship buildings. It's not about, point me to the 2 buildings in your portfolio that you think are energy efficient. It's about, specifically what is like, what's the statistics on your overall portfolio, energy efficiency and climate impact and so on and so forth. So I think it's that kind of mindset move that I'm hoping and I'm positive and optimistic that COVID's going to bring as well, towards more of a proactive stance to embedding this within the business and into the BAU. And anytime you want to achieve a specific outcome in real estate, thinking, I think people now do think, what's the sustainability angle to that? In future, it's going to be, what's the new technology or new innovation angle to doing that, and going a bit more first principles rather than this is the way we've done it before, so we're just do it the same way again.
Yeah, but surely with all the investment going in, especially from the VCs, surely there are more solutions. There is like way more adoption. Like Alex, from a JL standpoint, what have you sort of seen? Is there a delay? Are things moving as fast as the VCs and founders would like it to be? What are your thoughts?
These are some big questions. This is almost a whole other topic because, yes, there's a lot of money, VC money fueling tech. But it's really important to remember that VCs have a very different business model to real estate.
Yeah.
And the reasons for and how they invest in anything, but certainly in technologies, is not how real estate companies assess investments. And I think that is often either not communicated or is poorly understood, because these two worlds are now colliding. And you're always seeing headlines about, PropTech A or PropTech B has just raised loads of money. It must be the best thing since sliced bread. No, that's just the VC model of we're just going to pump a load of money into a load of ideas, and one of them is going to make, one of them probably will. I mean, they work on an 80% failure rate. So that is not how real estate works. And I think, therefore, to put the two things together and say, well, there's loads of really cool, really fast-growing technology companies. Why are they not onboarding into real estate? Because they're completely different, business models, completely different ways of assessing value. And I think that is a key point. And I think that you've still got an industry which is assessing value on a very different principle.
Yeah.
So, just bringing in a PropTech that's a unicorn PropTech because it's made, billion dollar, value is irrelevant if it's not going to add, bottom line, rent or bottom line asset value. So I think park the question of, yes, of course, there's going to be developments in technologies that will bring whole new levels of innovation, whole new levels of insight and new business models. Yes, absolutely. But there's an awful lot that could be done with what we have, and it's not about technology.
Getting all teams to use it as well. It must be so painful for especially the founders and the technology companies.
How many people know how to use Excel? Or how many people know how to use the full depth of Salesforce? You know what you need to know, right? You know what you need to know to do your job. And so I think, that's what, and I, certainly would agree that PropTech generally has been quite poor at communicating the value. And again, I think that's been a journey. I mean, I remember from, Jack, you probably, when you were at Nuvian saw this, some of the original pitches were, I've just got some money from a VC. They've told me to come and get, JLL or CVs on my books. Can we come and do a pilot? I mean, that was literally the pitch. And I'm like, well, hold on, what is it you do? That's become a lot more, I think that there's become a lot more, a lot better at the BD side of it, not least because a lot of these companies have pinched people from real estate to come and support the BD side of it. But the maturity of how you propose your solution and where and how it adds value, and crucially, how can it align with the business model of your client?
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned it there, more people moving between both industries, both from kind of the more, let's say, startup techie side moving into real estate, and more people with real estate background moving on to that side, the other side of the fence. I think it's only going to help that. I agree. I think it's both sides. I've seen companies who have pitched a really good pitch, and then the response on the corporate side isn't what you'd expect in terms of just in terms of different timelines of adoption or just like the strategic value around it. On the other side, I've seen where all that company needs to say is, and I almost know exactly what the value creation is, and that was kind of my role at Nuvian and probably yours at JLL, was kind of almost being that translator and almost an extension sometimes of the business development teams. Real estate is a very simple industry, but it's also a very it's not the easiest industry to understand, I think, in terms of that length of supply chain, incentives at every level, and as you say, where things can, the pitfalls of adoption are certainly there's definitely enough of them in real estate.
Yeah, we're I'm going to be doing an event I need to get a date and diary for it, but with Rick's, and there's going to be sort of two conversations going on. One is, what do the technologists need to understand about real estate, depending on the role, whether you're on the data side or on the innovation implementation side. But then also, what do the real estate professionals need to learn about, whether it's when they're studying their rigs, about sort of innovation and technology. And it's like, this can be like a slight debate, and we'll have people from both sides and what they wish they learned, what they didn't know, and everything like that. So that'd be quite interesting. And we also, for the future of real estate, which we're going to come on to that question, what's the next 5 years hold? Does that in syllabuses from universities, those real estate universities, or the courses which Rick says, are they going to start implementing, like new modules where it's around, software as a service, around sustainability? I know within geography, there's elements of it as well, but there's not really core modules on real estate innovation at the moment. So that'll be quite telling. So we'll see what happens there. But going on to our final question, what does the next 5 years hold for PropTech or real estate innovation or built environment innovation, whatever phrase we're sort of going with? Alex, you go first.
From a personal perspective, I think it's interesting because, being that sort of jack of all trades, as it were, I've been there, if you like, at the beginning, in inverted commas, and helping the business to kind of create, an engine and create the sort of narrative. And now, and speaking from a JLL perspective, obviously, as you say, we've got JLLT, a whole team of people, many of whom are, new, come from tech. A lot of it's based in San Fran. It's a different culture, different, different organization, and the speed at which they want to move at. And so I think that's certainly something we will see. And I think dedicating people at senior level as to, this is your responsibility. Is it innovation? That doesn't just mean tech. Is it tech? If it is that tech we're investing in? Is that tech we're building? Is that tech to make sure that the lights turn on? Whose responsibility is that? What's the supply chain and the sort of partnership model we use to manage that? How do we engender culture in ideation? Whose role is that? So there's a whole range of new skills and new roles, I think, to support what we've talked about in terms of how do you not only go and find tech but onboard it. So I think we will see a professionalization of that and new roles emerging.
Jack, what about you? What does the next 5 years hold for PropTech, from your opinion?
Yeah, I agree with Alex in terms of what the incumbents need to do, and on the VC point, I suppose the other thing I say is not every problem or pain point is necessarily VC backable, in terms of like the solution you build. It has to have a certain business model really to be like a solid attractive venture investment, and VC is definitely part of the solution. It's probably a big part of the solution in many ways, but I think real estate also needs to put up its bootstraps and look at how can we solve problems. If you're not being brought solutions to problems you have, how can you build them themselves and explore more creative ways of looking at them, as Alex mentioned a couple of examples around any other industry. No one goes in 5 years from being an industry that was at the stage where real estate was 5 years ago to a fully digital industry. It's all about that journey and taking it through the phases, and I think the real estate is definitely on that journey, but the next 5 years I'm sure will be even more exciting than the last 5.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Hopefully slightly quicker than Alex's first 13 years of his career in that. Sorry.
Say that Jack's analogy of teenagers reminded me of a quote that actually I used to use for sustainability, but I think 10 years ago, so this probably shows the point there, but I think you could adequately use it today in terms of digital, which is technology or digital is like teenage sex. Everyone's talking about it, but no one's doing it well. I think that's probably true as well. I used to use that with sustainability, but I think equally applicable now.
Here is a message from our sponsor, Michael Beckerman from PropTech.
Hey, this is Michael Beckerman from PropTech. I'm here to invite you to check out PropTech Plus, the first streaming platform devoted to innovation and technology in the built world, featuring new weekly videos from the world's leading real estate and tech professionals. The first month of streaming is absolutely free, and then you could use the code LMRE to receive 25% off your second month. To learn more, visit plus.cretech.com.
On that note, guys, we're coming to the LMRE part, which is how we end it. So Alex, I'll ask you first. So, and the L part is, what was your, main lesson you've learned? The second part is the M part, which is, you can mention anyone, whether it's a product or service you'd like to give a shout out to. The R part is, what's the most rewarding aspect of working in PropTech or doing your role? And E is, what are you most excited about personally for the future of PropTech? Let's start with, your biggest lessons learned since starting your career.
Probably the biggest lesson when I think back is actually don't be afraid to take chances, take risks. If you've got an idea, take it to whoever you think is going to be able to make that idea come to life, and go for it. And I think don't procrastinate too long about it.
Yeah.
That would be certainly a lesson I've learned.
Okay, now mention anyone. It could be a product in the ESG sustainability space which you rate. It's completely up to you.
Rather than specifically one product, I think I would just say that I think net zero certainly is something which is now taking a lot of attention. I think the transition to sustainable buildings, we've started, but we've got a long way to go and an incredibly short time frame. So I think that if you are in the space already, or you're looking at the space, whether you're an investor or whether you're a tech company, I think massive opportunity there. And so really just a shout out to everyone in that space, but also to those sort of coming into that space. And obviously, if anyone out there that's got a product or a solution that they want to show me, then I'm more than happy to be connected.
Beautiful. Okay, now what's the most rewarding aspect of working in PropTech?
It's probably the people. I think meeting the people, doing things like this, but certainly meeting new pioneering people that are really trying to come at a problem with a different way of solving it. For me, that's really interesting, and constantly learning, which is important for me.
Awesome. And E, the final part, what are you most excited about?
Probably, actually, not to repeat, but I think the sustainability piece. I think if we can really make big impacts in the way that we design, build, and manage buildings, really properly sustainably, then for me, that's probably the biggest impact that our industry can have in the next 100 years.
Thank you for that, Alex. Okay, Jack, your turn now. Okay, what's the main or biggest lesson you've learned throughout your career? Bear in mind, this doesn't have to be from Insurami or Nuvian. It could be maybe when you started at Cambridge. I don't know.
I mean, I don't want to be too similar to Alex, but I do think not just, I suppose, taking it to someone if you see a problem, but understand the level of knowledge in this industry around certain topics like innovation and technology. The benchmark's pretty low. And so I think it's an extremely flat, and it's still today, it's an extremely flat playing field for people who want to advance their career. You can try and be the best leasing agent in London, for example. That's a very competitive market. I still think innovation, if you're good and smart and work hard and understand the problems and truly try and kind of be an independent thinker about it, I think being an independent thinker, used to be undervalued in real estate. And I think going forward is going to be the most valuable thing on that side. So that'd be my lesson.
Okay, what about, you mentioned anyone or a product, you can't say Insurami.
The leadership team at Nuvian, and whether that was my managers and Alice Boheny and Abigail Dean, or my team I worked with, Jacinda Laughlin in the US, or Mike Sales and the CEO and that whole team. For me, that was kind of the turning point in my career in terms of being kind of backed as a young guy who's interested in this topic to make a success of it and bring value to the business. And I think I always be kind of grateful for that. And Nuvian's not a company that's perfect in every situation on the innovation, as no company is, but the kind of the leadership mentality they have around it, I think is really admirable, and the people that work there are great. So that'd be my not very exciting mention, I suppose.
So it's nice to hear someone talk about their previous company in such a kind way as you just have. What's the most rewarding aspect of working in PropTech? You're now in a startup. Is that maybe there's something you want to say about Insurami here?
I'll mention Insurami every single one.
Please do.
No, I think it does apply to Insurami, but I think seeing a new solution to an age-old problem. I think lots of the really interesting thing with real estate is the problems you're solving have been problems often for decades or hundreds of years. Again, not to mention Insurami, but like the cash deposit has always been, for almost hundreds of years, a feature of leases or how people transact on the lease side on real estate. And I think just the excitement of thinking, we've got a new way of doing this that works and is better than the old way, and so on and so forth. Whether that's on the adoption side at Nuvian or not, that's what really gets me out of bed, is more the idea of doing something, solving a problem differently than it's ever been done before.
No, agreed. Bro, guys, I knew we wouldn't do the usual sort of 30-minute podcast here, and you know what, the audience is going to absolutely love this. I feel like we've covered a lot of bases, and everyone who's listening, if you want to reach out to Alex or Jack, we'd reach out to Alex because you want to talk about your products, if JLL, would ever want to implement it, and speak to Jack if you want to learn about sort of deposit-free renting as well within the office space as well.
Office and any commercial real estate, we should add. Retail, office, industrial.
I love it. But no, thank you guys, and I'll catch up with you after the show. Thank you for joining us this week on the Propcast, and a big thanks to our guests and our sponsors, PropTech and ReamTech. Make sure you visit our website, lmre.tech, where you can subscribe to our newsletter, keep up with our industry news and events, or if you're looking for your next career move, it's all on there. The Propcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube, where all good content is found. Whilst we're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate it if you could spread the word and tell a friend about it, or even write us a review. And I'll catch you next week.